When I use the word vulnerability, what I'm really saying in like the most basic way is the ability to, share my deepest heart, my deepest emotional experience, my thoughts and my feelings with my wife, and have her receive that information and to really feel, seen and heard and understood by her, and then for that process to be reciprocated. So for her to share and for me to see and understand her. That's kind of the idea of humility. It's like, okay, I hear you, I receive the information. I'm willing to, make adjustments, make changes. So I want to create this like really beautiful feedback loop between two people where, information can be passed to the next person, it can be digested, we can make changes, and then so on and so forth. So if humility is not present, that feedback loop gets stunted.
Are you a martial artist where there's training? And I actually am not a martial artist, but I learned about this from my husband, who has a black belt and has been an instructor. And one of the things that is so beautiful about a dojo is that people come in as beginners and they participate learning from the environment, honing their skills, continuing to progress. And there's a really special culture in the black belt building community. Maybe Quentin Hafner, you want to say something about that in just a moment, but this is my entree and welcome to you, whose brand is Black Belt Husbands. And I just love the idea of taking the dojo and black belt building community into being a husband, where everyone starts as a beginner and can continually grow and refine by learning from other models and practicing skills. So I'm so glad you're here on the Intimate Marriage Podcast. I want to welcome you and ask you to share, how come Black Belt Husbands? What does it mean to you?
Well, thank you. I'm really glad I'm here too. So, Black Belt Husbands. So I think you captured the essence of exactly what I was trying to capture when I wrote the book. I am a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And so that's kind of my passion project. That's my hobby. And when I started Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I noticed that there was so many cool metaphors in martial arts that were so applicable to marriage. I always tell people my little Quentinism about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but it's the same for marriage too, is that the hardest day in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is your first day walking through the door of your very first class. And I remember doing that myself and being terrified and being so nervous and not really knowing what I was stepping into and wondering if I was going to die, if I was going to get beat up. And it's the same for, I think wanting to really work on our marriages too. There's an internal resistance to it. There's sometimes people will wait a very, very long time before they walk through the door for the first time. But once they walk through the door, they usually never look back.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about the concept or the context of Black Belt Husbands is that so many things that we do in life, whether it's financial management or becoming a doctor and practicing medicine or learning our times tables, cooking dinner, whatever it is, the more we practice, I guess driving is probably the image most people use, that with practice, our skills improve. And sometimes that's true in marriage, but sometimes it is not true. And so I feel like Black Belt Husbands is just this very efficient way of communicating this idea that with practice, we improve, and it doesn't mean we ever get to perfection. And I think that is truly a very beautiful way to describe what is possible in marriage.
In our little community, we say that a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is really just a white belt that didn't quit. This idea of mastery or excellence, it really doesn't exist. It's just kind of a ethereal concept. We get better. Certainly, we get better with skills and we get better with technique. But the idea that we could actually become the master, it just it's a goalpost that's forever moving, which makes the game really fun.
For a sensei, a teacher in a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu dojo, they can anticipate the general trends in what's challenging after walking in the door. And as each of the belts are acquired, there's a different curriculum, which is, I presume, somewhat individualized for the person going through the curriculum. But basically, there are milestones that are anticipated. What would you say are some of the milestones that a man goes through in his journey to become a really awesome, present, self-resourced husband?
Oh, such a good question. Okay. So I had to get good at humility and I had to get good at consistency. So I had to keep showing up. I had to be very open-minded and take my lumps, get my ego out of the way. And I had to kind of start, learning about myself and figuring out kind of the things that were getting in my way. So self-awareness, humility, and consistency. So that's chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Black Belt Husband. And so each chapter in the book is, the book is basically organized like, okay, if you're a white belt husband, you got to accomplish these things. If you're a blue belt husband, you got to accomplish these things. And so on until you get to black belt. And this is kind of my experience working with men in marriage too, is that the biggest hurdle for guys in marriage typically is humility, is just recognizing that you don't really know a lot about marriage and you probably have to ask somebody to help you. That is, in my experience, the biggest obstacle that gets in the way specifically for guys improving their marriage. And it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu. When it comes to martial arts and fighting skills, there's a lot of like guys out there who can talk a big game, who might get really angry, who might think they're really tough. But when it really comes to like being proficient and knowing how to defend yourself, they don't have skills. And so it's the same exact concept in marriage. There's a lot of guys, because their egos are in the way, they think that they're good at doing the marriage game, but they're really not good at doing the marriage game. And so just getting over that initial hump, I always tell guys, once they can kind of pass that initial roadblock, everything gets so much easier. But as you probably know, that's a big mountain to climb for a lot of guys.
If someone has climbed that mountain, then this conversation is already fascinating and affirming. If they haven't yet climbed that mountain, there's something that you said in our exchange on Instagram that I'd like to bring in now about why creating emotional safety is the key to having a more passionate and intimate marriage. I think that there's a connection between humility and the willingness to create emotional safety, which is why I'm using that as a segue. So let's first talk about how humility is required to create emotional safety, and then move on as you choose in saying why emotional safety is so important for an erotically alive, passionate marriage.
My connection, maybe thinking about how does humility to connect to emotional safety, I think about the necessary feedback loop that has to be present in order for relationships to thrive. And so the idea is that if I'm dissatisfied in my relationship or if something's not working for me, I have to be able to bring that information to my partner, and they have to be willing to receive that information in a non-defensive way. That's kind of the idea of humility. It's like, okay, I hear you. I receive the information. I'm willing to, make adjustments, make changes. So I want to create this like really beautiful feedback loop between two people where, information can be passed to the next person, it can be digested, we can make changes, and then so on and so forth. So if humility is not present, that feedback loop gets stunted, and then the whole relationship starts to break down because we don't have an ability to make those corrective changes. And so I would say that seems to be like it's such a foundational piece for emotional safety, because if that thing is missing, then all the beautiful life-giving stuff that we could really talk about that makes marriages 11 out of 10 all that stuff can never be present if humility isn't. So that's why humility is like at the very beginning of that book, because it's such a just a foundational aspect of creating emotional safety. And then when it comes to the emotional safety thing, I talk about that a lot in my work with guys. I mostly work with guys. So in my work with guys, because a lot of guys still haven't connected the dot. What is very likely is that the way that I talk to my wife, the way that I look at my wife, the way that I speak to my wife, the way that I interact with my wife, that I am going to hurt her more likely than anybody else is going to hurt her. And so that's kind of where this idea of emotional safety that's how I like to get guys motivated to think about that. It's like, oh yeah, okay, well, I never really thought about it that way. So we want to focus on that stuff because that's really just the building blocks to creating a great relationship.
I'd love to go in the direction of what makes a marriage 11 out of 10. So if a man brings humility and a willingness to really be like on the way to a black belt in terms of having the repetition serve towards mastery and not towards kind of boring automation and frustration, what kind of relationship is then possible? How would you describe the 11 out of 10 connection?
Okay, so the 11 out of 10 connection, I think that all of the relationship magic happens the deeper we can be vulnerable with one another. So as vulnerability increases in a relationship, that sense of like everything that feels really good also increases in a relationship. So vulnerability is a really tough thing. And it's a tough thing to learn. It's a tough thing to wrap your head around. And if you didn't grow up in a family that role modeled a lot of vulnerability, you probably are listening to me thinking, I don't even know what this person's saying. And that's okay, because I didn't grow up in a family that role modeled vulnerability either. When I use the word vulnerability, what I'm really saying in like the most basic way is the ability to share my deepest heart, my deepest emotional experience, my thoughts and my feelings with my wife, and have her receive that information and to really feel, seen and heard and understood by her. And then for that process to be reciprocated. So for her to share and for me to see and understand her. So when a relationship is clicking on that level, that's when people will describe relationships as being, life-giving, and so much to the point where it surpasses those really good feelings that we experienced in the honeymoon stage. And unfortunately, not a lot of people get there. But the cool thing for anybody listening to this is that it's possible for anybody. I like to say that I'm living proof, because I did not grow up in an emotionally intelligent family. I grew up in a wildly chaotic, alcoholic, abusive family that was so dysfunctional. So I do not come from good relationship genes. But my wife and I have the most incredible marriage. And the only reason we have that is because we've spent a lot of time and energy investing in it. So it's possible for anybody. As the level of vulnerability rises in your relationship, the level of satisfaction and everything that feels really good also rises. And when I think of vulnerability, this is what I've been thinking about lately. Does that resonate with you a little bit?
It really does in really deep ways. And I absolutely agree. In some ways, what you've just said reminds me of the Marianne Williamson quote, which Nelson Mandela said, that I don't have verbatim, but along the lines of, it's not our darkness that we're most afraid of, it's our light. And I'll expand and say our joy and our success. And so often, in general, we connect through common problems that's in the world at large. And in terms of getting attention from a spouse, many marriages have a culture where when there's problems, they're there for one another. And when things are going well, they're going well. So you don't need attention. In fact, I have a couple I'm coaching now, just a beautiful, extraordinary couple. They're warriors for one another when life comes at them with professional and medical and just financial challenges. They are incredible at standing beside one another and having one another's back in facing the challenges outside of themselves. But the challenges between them or the joyful times, that's really what I've been teaching them how to navigate, because that's new terrain that wasn't modeled for them. And it is confronting, and it's much simpler to feel connected in challenging times. I mean, maybe there are exceptions to that, milestone moments when, I don't know, but I know, first is white belt, then blue because you've said so, then there are others, and then there's black. But I wonder if you would give guidance to the white belt man who's at the beginning of learning, not really even convinced that it's worth sharing more deeply and being vulnerable, mostly because previously it hasn't gone well in his life. What's the first step for him? And then, whether it's a blue belt or just a more advanced belt, what is the step that someone in that situation could take? And then maybe you've already shared when it comes to sharing joy, but what's the next move in sharing to create more connection for someone who identifies with more of a black belt situation? Because just to be more vulnerable, first of all, to have it land, and second of all, to make it actionable, is just totally variable depending on where someone is in their journey.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we might say that it's not a good idea to share vulnerably if it doesn't feel safe, so I think we have to kind of make sure that, we have some good kind of operating agreements, some good kind of mutual understanding between two people. But I tend to think that,
which, by the way, relatively speaking, that was kind of a vulnerable share. You could have just buttoned it up and had it all together. So I know you don't need that feedback, but I want to just point out as you listen that was a good example of kind of mild vulnerability, because you and I are not looking to create that kind of connection, but we each aspire to be as authentic as possible in the context we're in. So that was a beautiful share.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, the marriage thing, the longer you're kind of in this world, you see that there's so many just threads to it everywhere, and sometimes I genuinely wish I could just make it so formulaic and simple and just tell people, do this, do this, do this, and then you're going to be good. But
especially because you have mostly male clients who are just yearning for that user's manual. Exactly.
So somewhere in Black Belt Husband, I forget exactly what chapter it is, but I think it's 6 or 7, like that. I write a whole chapter about male friendship, and could you hear that on my end? I think 6 or 7. I read a whole chapter on male friendship, and the title of it is something like Building a Band of Brothers or something like that. So the idea is that most guys learn best through role modeling and through just, being around somebody, experiencing it. The kind of things that you and I are talking about, I have learned that they are best caught, not taught. And, I could, try to explain vulnerability and, walk somebody through it and say, okay, well, here's your instructions, 1, 2, 3, do this. And it's oh my gosh, it's very difficult for that to happen in real life and to be successful. But if I just told a guy, just said, hey, spend time in this experience, spend time in this container of guys and just be with us and watch us interact with each other and watch what we say, watch how we respond to each other, watch how we listen to each other. If you have enough time in that environment, you won't need to be taught anything because you'll just receive it. It'll be experientially caught by you. This is answering that question that you asked about the beginner, and how do you get acquainted with some of this? My deepest encouragement to anybody listening, and that's kind of in that stage, would be just to say, we got to find great role models. The concept of mentorship and role model is something that historically used to be very important in our culture, but over the years, it's gotten increasingly irrelevant. That's come with a huge cost, in my opinion. And so we need role models. We need mentors. And it doesn't have to be a paid relationship. It doesn't have to be a professional relationship. It could be just someone that you really look up to, someone that's, seasoned, someone that you recognize is doing life really well. go out of your way to try to spend time with them, build a relationship with them, because that's how you're going to learn how to do this well. And what I know is that so many guys out there are trying to do the marriage journey completely on their own. They don't have that role model. They don't have that mentorship. The idea of going to therapy feels like chewing on glass for them, which I totally understand. And so they're just like, you know what? I'm going to hunker down. I'm just going to do it myself. And that's also a costly mistake.
And I want to add, with real respect for the man in that situation, that part of that is a respect and a loyalty to his woman and to the marriage. And he doesn't want to, quite frankly, talk shit about her or about his experience with her. And that contributes to the lone wolf phenomenon. It's not an arrogance. I mean, it can be, but mostly the more motivated men are doing it themselves because they can't figure out how to discuss the situation they're in and the challenges they're facing in a way that doesn't feel wrong towards their woman.
A lot of men kind of hold that honor, where they don't want to talk bad about their wife and they don't want to kind of air their dirty laundry. And so they just kind of keep it inside. I mean, I certainly respect that. I'm such an advocate of male friendship. I'm such an advocate of mentorship, of finding role models. In the therapeutic community, this is also one of the reasons I wrote Black Belt Husband, is just because in the therapy community, like where I live in California, or where you live too. So the ratio of therapists in California is 4-to-1 female to male. Okay. So it's just a dominated female industry. So what that means is that there's not a lot of male role models in this space, kind of in that kind of relationship space. We got to be creative. We got to find other places to kind of find those outlets, find guys, maybe it's through church or through synagogue or whatever feels important to you. We got to find those spaces and incorporate the role modeling, because that's where we're going to learn best on how to be successful in relationships.
Yeah. And I want to add, I'm part of a community that I'll tell you about later. It's called the Big Tent, and it's professionals who are devoted to men's work. And it's probably 80-85% men. I'm a participant because I work with a lot of men, either in a men's group I have, or because I'm working with heteronormative couples. And it's actually incredible how many new projects and some long-standing ways to serve men are out there. So I just want to affirm what you're saying and encourage people to look that, yes, there's straight up therapy, but there's also, there are specifically platforms where it's male therapists for male patients. There are groups for entrepreneurial men, the Mankind Project, Sacred Sons. There actually is more available for the person who's willing to look. There are many more options available, and I just really want to encourage you, as you listen, to definitely check out Black Belt Husbands. And if that isn't your cup of tea, keep looking, because there's more available than I was aware of, and I'm more likely to be available than the average person.
There is a cultural shift for sure. So I do mastermind groups like out of my business. And I remember maybe even just 10 years ago when I would do a group, it would be very difficult to get guys to come. I felt like I was selling ice to Eskimos. But now there's a greater sense of openness to that kind of a thing, which is just so awesome. So I think there is a little bit of a cultural shift happening. And I think guys they're seeing the benefit of doing something like that.
Before we started recording, we discovered we both live in California, you in Southern California, me in Northern California. And so I was going to ask you if living in California, since you have lived here your whole life, it sounds like, if that has contributed to a kind of softness in your strength coming from the childhood you described.
Yeah, wonderful question. Okay, I love that. Well, of course, therapy has been a big part of my healing journey, but my faith is also a really big part of my journey. So I come from the Christian tradition, and my faith is just it's such a big part of my life.
let's go a little bit deeper on that,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
there are plenty of men of faith,
Mm-hmm.
men of who are really devoted to practicing their Christian faith, going to church regularly, whatever that looks like for them, who come from troubled homes and do not necessarily heal in the way that you have. So, will you be more specific? Like, what is it about faith but what exactly has served your evolution? Because going to church is not enough.
Definitely not enough.
I'm tapping into your willingness to be vulnerable as I ask
Yeah.
the question, because
Totally.
we could, but I don't think it serves to have a theological question right now.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
more about your sovereignty, or
Mm-hmm.
which Christian teachings you've aimed to embody. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm asking at a much more individualized and less theological level than I might
Mm-hmm.
be.
In the Christian tradition, the idea is that, we are all sinners, forgiven by a loving God. And I take that really to heart in my own life. And I feel a tremendous amount of gratitude for the forgiveness that I have been given, not only by my creator, but by other people. My only kind of like my natural response to that is to try to pay it forward and to be forgiving of others too. And so that posture keeps my heart really soft. It helps me see the innocence in people. It helps me see the suffering in people. And what it does for me is it helps me tread very lightly, because I could also go to a very egotistical place, like I'm kind of superior or self-righteous, and it helps me stay very grounded in that humility that we talked
Yes,
about.
I was thinking of the humility. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like I've been forgiven of a lot, and I think about always, of forgiving others for a lot, and I just live in that kind of posture all the time. I think as Christians, we are commanded to do that. It's kind of like a non-starter. So I take it serious and I try to live that way. It really informs my work with people because, as clients can be challenging, but it helps me, do good work, I think, with people, and definitely helps inside of my marriage too.
When people reference faith as a positive contribution in marriage, when you're listening as a Christian, it speaks to you. And when you're listening not as a Christian, it speaks to you. So, yes, I really appreciate that response. And I feel like this conversation, though deep and having covered a lot of terrain in its own way, feels like this buffet of appetizers that it's just whetting our appetite for where we would go next. But we're not going to go anywhere in particular right now. Is there anything that you want to say, either about how people can follow up with you or anything else to complete our conversation?
Well, yeah. So just practically, it's easy to find me online. You could just Google my name, and then I also just want to kind of reiterate what I said earlier too. That if you're listening to this, your marriage is struggling. If you just feel kind of at a loss, if it feels hopeless, I just encourage you not to give up. You're listening to someone who probably comes from a more disturbed and broken background than you do. And like I said, if somehow I can figure it out, you could figure it out too. It just takes some new learning, some new knowledge, and a commitment to that path. And you'll be surprised how far you can get.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been great chatting with you.